My name is Lottie, and I'm 58 years old. I never thought the darkest day of my life would be made worse by my own flesh and blood. There I stood in my black dress mourning my husband of 35 years when my son Albert walked in with a stranger on his arm. "This is the real woman in Dad's life," he announced coldly, "and the real mother to me." Then he handed me an envelope and said the house wasn't mine anymore. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from, and hit subscribe to follow my journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and unexpected triumph. I met Douglas when I was 23 years old. He was 26, ambitious with kind blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled. We fell in love, quickly married within a year, and built what I thought was a beautiful life together. Our son Albert came along a few years later, completing our family. I can still remember holding that tiny bundle in my arms, looking up at Douglas, both of us teary-eyed with joy. I never imagined Albert would one day look at me with such hatred. Douglas was a talented structural engineer whose career flourished over the years. He started at a modest firm, but eventually founded his own successful company, Douglas Warren Engineering. I was so proud of him. I had been working as a registered nurse when we met, passionate about helping others. But after Albert was born, we decided I would scale back to part-time and eventually quit altogether to focus on raising our son and supporting Douglas's growing career. "You're making the bigger sacrifice," Douglas used to tell me. "Your contribution to this family is just as valuable as mine." I believed him. I threw myself into creating a warm, loving home. I volunteered at Albert's schools, hosted dinner parties for Douglas's clients, managed our household, and was always there when either of them needed me. For 30 years, this arrangement worked well. At least I thought it did. Albert grew into a smart, handsome young man who graduated from college with honors and secured a good job at a financial firm in the city. Douglas's business thrived, allowing us to live comfortably in our beautiful colonial home in a nice suburb. We took family vacations, celebrated holidays together, and seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. But about 5 years ago, things began to change. Douglas started traveling more frequently for work. "Expanding the business," he'd say. "New clients in different cities." The trips grew longer and more frequent. When he was home, he seemed distracted, often locked away in his home office or taking calls in private. I found a strange text message on his phone once. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." It read from someone saved as KM. When I asked him about it, he explained it was from a new client, Catherine Miller, who was excited about their project. I wanted to believe him. After 30 years of marriage, trust wasn't something I thought I needed to question. Around the same time, my relationship with Albert began to change too. Our weekly dinners became monthly, then barely at all. When he did visit, he seemed withdrawn, almost suspicious of me. If I asked about his life or tried to mother him in any small way, he'd become irritated. "I'm not a child anymore, Mom," he'd say sharply. "I don't need you checking up on me." It hurt, but I chalked it up to him establishing his independence. Every mother has to let go eventually, right? I never suspected there was something more sinister behind his changing attitude. Then 8 months ago, Douglas complained of chest pains. A visit to the doctor confirmed he had a heart condition that required medication and monitoring, but wasn't immediately life-threatening if properly managed. He seemed to improve with treatment, and life continued as normal, or what had become our new normal, with its growing silences and distance. I never got to say goodbye. Douglas died suddenly one afternoon while at his office. A massive heart attack, they said. One moment he was alive, the next gone forever. The shock was indescribable. 35 years of life together ended without warning. In my grief, I barely registered Albert's strange behavior. He came to the house when he heard the news, but stayed only briefly. He handled some of the funeral arrangements from afar, but declined to stay with me, saying he had important matters to attend to. I was too numb to question it, grateful for any help I could get while trying to process that my husband was gone. The funeral was scheduled for a week after Douglas's death. I spent those days in a fog, going through the motions, accepting condolences from friends and neighbors, and wondering how life could possibly continue without him. Despite our recent distance, I had never stopped loving Douglas. He was my partner, my best friend, the father of my child. I couldn't imagine a world without him in it. Little did I know the true devastation was yet to come. The day of the funeral arrived with appropriately gloomy weather. A persistent drizzle fell from gray skies as people gathered at the church. I sat in the front pew, a tissue clutched in my trembling hand, staring at the mahogany casket that held the body of my husband. My closest friends had rallied around me. Susan, my best friend since college, sat beside me, her hand resting protectively on my arm. Several of our neighbors were there, along with Douglas's business associates and clients who had become friends over the years. The church filled steadily as testament to how many lives Douglas had touched. But I couldn't help noticing Albert's absence. My own son nowhere to be seen as his father's funeral service was about to begin. I had texted him that morning, "The service starts at 11. Please don't be late." He had replied with just a terse, "I'll be there." The minister began speaking, offering words of comfort about Douglas's life and legacy. I tried to focus to absorb the sentiment, but my mind kept drifting to the empty space beside me, where Albert should have been sitting, supporting his grieving mother. Nearly 20 minutes into the service, during a moment of quiet reflection, the church doors opened. Heads turned. I looked back, expecting to finally see Albert, hoping he had merely been delayed. My son did walk in tall and solemn in his dark suit, but he wasn't alone. A woman I didn't recognize clung to his arm. She was perhaps in her 40s, attractive in a calculated way, with perfectly styled auburn hair and a black dress that seemed more appropriate for a cocktail party than a funeral. Something about her struck me immediately as wrong, out of place, invasive in this most private moment of grief. Albert didn't look apologetic for his late arrival. Instead, he guided this woman directly to the front pew where I sat. People watched in confusion as they approached. Susan's grip on my arm tightened protectively. "There's room back there," I whispered when they reached us, nodding toward the half-empty pews behind us. I didn't want a stranger beside me during my husband's funeral, but Albert shook his head. "We're sitting up front where family belongs," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet church. The woman smiled at me, not a smile of sympathy, but something closer to triumph. The minister paused awkwardly, then continued with the service. I sat rigid with confusion and embarrassment, acutely aware of the murmurs and stares from the congregation. Who was this woman? Why had Albert brought her, and why was he acting as if she had any right to sit in the family section? I got my answer at the worst possible moment. After the service, people gathered in the church hall for the reception. I stood receiving condolences, mechanical in my responses, still disturbed by Albert's behavior. Then he approached me, still arm in arm with the mystery woman. "Mom," he said loudly, drawing the attention of those nearby. "There's someone you need to meet properly. This is Catherine. She was Dad's true love." The room seemed to tilt. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "What did you say?" I managed to whisper. Catherine extended her hand, which I didn't take. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Lottie," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Douglas was an extraordinary man." "What is this, Albert?" I asked, looking frantically between them. "This is the real woman in Dad's life," he announced clearly, causing conversations around us to stop abruptly. "And the real mother to me. She's been in our lives for 15 years, Mom. Dad just never had the courage to leave you." The hushed gasps from onlookers barely registered. My entire world was collapsing around me. Catherine lifted her left hand, displaying a diamond ring I had never seen before. "Douglas gave me this last year. We were going to tell you after he settled everything." "That's not possible," I said, my voice shaking. "We've been married 35 years. You're lying." Albert's face hardened. "Stop pretending, Mom. Dad told me everything. How you trapped him into marriage. How you threatened to take everything if he ever left. How unhappy you made him." Tears blurred my vision. Albert, your father never said those things. This woman is lying to you. Then explain this, he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. He thrust it into my hands. Dad's new will. The house isn't yours anymore, Mom. It's going to who deserves it. Catherine smiled, sliding her arm through Albert's. Douglas wanted to make sure his son was taken care of. And me, of course. You have 30 days to vacate, Albert added coldly. I'm sorry it has to be this way, but you brought this on yourself. I stood there, the envelope clutched in my trembling hands, as my son and this stranger turned and walked away. Friends rushed to my side, but their words of comfort couldn't penetrate the roaring in my ears. My husband was dead. My son had betrayed me. And according to the envelope in my hands, I was about to lose my home of 30 years. In that moment, surrounded by mourners who had just witnessed my public humiliation, I felt something inside me break. But I had no idea then that this breaking would eventually lead to my salvation. I returned home alone after the funeral, declining offers from friends to stay with me. I needed solitude to process the tsunami that had just crashed over my life. The house felt different now, haunted not just by Douglas's absence, but by the terrible revelations at the funeral. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope Albert had given me, sitting untouched before me. Part of me wanted to tear it to pieces to deny its existence and everything it represented, but I knew I had to face whatever it contained. With trembling fingers, I finally opened it. Inside was a legal document, a new will dated just 3 months prior. My eyes scanned the formal language, catching phrases that stabbed like knives. Revoke all prior wills and codicils. To my son, Albert Warren, I bequeath my primary residence. To Catherine Mills, my partner, I leave 40% ownership of Douglas Warren Engineering. There was a small provision for me, a pittance compared to what Albert and Catherine were receiving, just enough that it couldn't be contested as having forgotten me entirely. The document was properly signed and witnessed. It looked legitimate. I let the papers fall to the table and put my head in my hands. How could this be happening? 35 years of marriage erased, rewritten by this new narrative, where I was the villain, the obstacle to Douglas's true happiness. That night was the loneliest of my life. I lay in our bed, my bed now, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my marriage, searching for signs I had missed. Had Douglas really been unhappy all these years? Had he really been involved with Catherine for 15 years, nearly half our marriage? Why wouldn't he have just asked for a divorce if he was so miserable? None of it made sense. The Douglas I knew wasn't cruel or deceitful. He was kind, honest, sometimes distant in recent years, but never malicious. The man described in Albert's accusations was a stranger to me. Morning brought no clarity, only a pounding headache and swollen eyes from a night of tears. I was making coffee when the doorbell rang. A court officer stood on my porch, official paperwork in hand. Mrs. Warren, I'm here to serve you with this notice. Another envelope, another legal document. This one informed me that I was being taken to court by Albert and Catherine. They were contesting any claims I might make on Douglas's estate beyond what was specified in the new will. They were requesting an expedited hearing due to urgent circumstances. I thanked the officer mechanically and closed the door, sliding down against it until I sat on the floor, the notice clutched to my chest. I had no money for a legal battle. Douglas had always handled our finances. I had a small personal account for household expenses, but nothing that could pay for the kind of lawyer I would need to fight this. My nursing license had expired years ago when I stopped working. At 58, the prospect of starting over was terrifying. After several hours of paralysis, I forced myself to move. If I was going to fight back, I needed information. I went to Douglas's home office, a room I'd rarely entered in recent years, as it had become his private domain. It felt like trespassing now, but I reminded myself that this was still my house, at least for the next 30 days. The office was meticulously organized. Filing cabinets lined one wall, his large desk dominated the center of the room, and bookshelves filled with engineering texts and family photos covered another wall. I started with the desk drawer, searching for anything that might help me understand what had happened. In the bottom drawer, buried beneath office supplies, I found an old laptop. It wasn't the sleek new model Douglas usually used for work. This one looked at least 5 years old. I pulled it out and opened it, surprised when it powered on. The battery was low but functional. There was no password protection, another surprise given Douglas's usual security consciousness. I clicked through to his email, finding an account I didn't recognize. And there they were. Hundreds of emails between Douglas and Catherine going back years. With a sick feeling in my stomach, I began to read. The earliest emails confirmed a professional relationship. Catherine had indeed been Douglas's executive assistant about 15 years ago, but within months the tone changed, became personal, flirtatious. I forced myself to keep reading, even as each message felt like another betrayal. Photos were attached to some emails. Douglas and Catherine together at restaurants on trips that had been described to me as business travel, looking intimate and happy. In some, Albert was with them. As a teenager, then a college student, then a young adult. Family outings I knew nothing about. Birthdays and holidays celebrated in parallel to the ones I thought we were sharing as a family. I found financial records too. Regular transfers to an account in Catherine's name, a lease for an apartment in the city under Douglas's name. Most damning of all, emails from just months ago discussing the new will and how to ensure I wouldn't contest it. Lottie will be taken care of, but not excessively, Douglas had written. The house should go to Albert, and the company's shares to you. I've spoken with my lawyer about the most airtight way to do this. No indication of coercion or threats from me. No unhappy marriage narrative that Albert had accused me of. Just cold, calculated planning to discard me after decades of marriage. I read an email from Catherine to Albert. Your father wants you to have everything he's worked for. Lottie had her chance to build a career, but chose dependence instead. You deserve the house, the legacy, everything. Albert's reply, I've always felt closer to you than to her anyway. You're the one who supported my ambitions. She just wanted me to stay her little boy forever. I closed the laptop, feeling physically ill. Not only had my husband betrayed me, but he and Catherine had systematically turned my son against me with lies and manipulation. Looking at those photos of the three of them together, I realized they had created an alternate family while keeping me in the dark. The most painful realization was that I had no proof that would help me legally. The emails showed Douglas's infidelity and deception, but nothing that would invalidate the new will. In fact, they reinforced that the will represented his true wishes. I had 30 days before I would be homeless, no job, limited savings, and now no family. In that moment of complete desolation, something shifted inside me. Beneath the grief and betrayal, a small spark of anger ignited. I deserved better than this. I had given 35 years of my life to this marriage, to raising our son, to supporting Douglas's career. I would not go quietly. I just needed to figure out how to fight back. The next morning, I called the one person I knew would help without judgment. Rachel Simmons, my friend from nursing school, who now worked as a social worker. We had stayed in touch over the years, though our busy lives meant we didn't see each other as often as we'd like. Lottie, I'm so sorry, she said after I poured out the whole sordid story. What Douglas and Albert did to you is unconscionable. I don't know what to do, Rachel, I admitted, my voice breaking. I can't afford a good lawyer. I have no proof that would invalidate the will. In 30 days, I'll have nowhere to go. Actually, Rachel said slowly, I might know someone who can help. Sarah Thompson. We went to college together. She's a family law attorney now, specializing in cases like yours. I can't afford legal fees, I reminded her. Let me talk to her. Sarah has a soft spot for women who've been taken advantage of by the system. She often takes cases pro bono or for reduced fees when she believes in the cause. By that afternoon, Rachel had arranged a meeting with Sarah for the following day. I spent the rest of the day gathering every document I could find related to our marriage, our finances, and Douglas's business. If I was going to fight, I needed ammunition. Sarah Thompson turned out to be a powerhouse in a pantsuit, mid-50s, sharp-eyed, with a no-nonsense attitude that immediately gave me hope. We met at her modest office downtown, and I laid out my situation while she listened intently, occasionally making notes. "Let me be straight with you, Lottie," she said when I finished. "This won't be easy. The will appears legally sound, and proving undue influence is challenging, especially when the person who created the will is deceased." My heart sank. "But," she continued, "there are other angles we can pursue. Douglas's assets weren't just his. They were marital assets built during your 35-year marriage. Your contributions as a homemaker and mother have value under the law, even if you didn't bring in a paycheck." "So there's hope?" I asked cautiously. "There's always hope," Sarah said firmly. "And frankly, I don't like the smell of this situation. A new will 3 months before death, a long-term affair, a son turned against his mother. It all suggests manipulation that a judge might find troubling." She agreed to take my case for a significantly reduced fee, with payment deferred until after the case was resolved. "If we win, we'll make sure your husband's estate pays my fees," she explained. Over the next week, Sarah and I worked together to build our case. We compiled evidence of my contributions to the marriage, photographs of the family events I'd organized, testimonials from friends about my role in Douglas's business success, documentation of the volunteering I'd done in Albert's schools, everything that showed I had been an active, supportive partner and mother. Meanwhile, Sarah dug deeper into Catherine's background. "Know your opponent," she said grimly. "We need to understand who we're dealing with." What she discovered was illuminating. Catherine Mills had indeed been Douglas's executive assistant 15 years ago, just as the emails had shown. But prior to that, she'd worked for 2 other wealthy businessmen, both of whom had divorced their wives after Catherine entered the picture. In both cases, she'd walked away with significant financial settlements. "She's a professional homewrecker," Sarah said bluntly as we reviewed the information. "She targets successful married men, worms her way into their lives, and profits from the destruction of their marriages." I remembered meeting Catherine briefly years ago during a visit to Douglas's office. She had been polite but distant, giving no indication of her relationship with my husband. Thinking back, I recalled how Douglas had tensed when I'd shown up unannounced that day, how he'd rushed me out with unusual haste. Sarah also uncovered financial records showing Douglas had been paying for an apartment for Catherine, funding expensive vacations, and even paying for Albert's graduation gift, a car that I thought we had given him together. "He's been supporting 2 households for years," Sarah explained, "which actually works in our favor. These are marital assets he's been diverting without your knowledge or consent." We also focused on Douglas's health in his final months. His heart condition had required several medications, some of which could affect cognitive function and decision-making. The timing of the new will just after his diagnosis raised questions about whether he had been fully competent when making such dramatic changes. "We'll request his medical records," Sarah said. "If he was on medication that could impair judgment when he signed the will, we have grounds to challenge its validity." With each discovery, each small victory in building our case, I felt myself growing stronger. The paralyzing shock of betrayal was giving way to determination. I began to see that what had happened wasn't just about losing Douglas to another woman. It was about systematic deception and financial exploitation. Sarah outlined our legal strategy challenge, the will based on Douglas's potentially impaired capacity, claim my rightful share of marital assets regardless of the will's provisions, and request temporary emergency support to prevent me from being evicted while the case was pending. "What about Albert?" I asked, the pain of my son's betrayal still raw. "Will I have to face him in court?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Eventually, yes. But Lottie, I want you to consider something. Albert has been manipulated too. From what we've seen in those emails, Catherine and Douglas have been feeding him a false narrative about you for years. He's a victim in his own way." I wasn't ready to forgive Albert, but Sarah's words gave me something to think about. Had my son been turned against me through deliberate manipulation? The thought gave me both pain and a glimmer of hope that perhaps someday we might find our way back to each other. By the end of the week, Sarah had filed our initial motions with the court and secured an emergency hearing to prevent my eviction until the case could be properly adjudicated. It was a small victory, but it meant I wouldn't be homeless in 30 days. It gave us time to fight. As I left Sarah's office that day, I stood taller than I had since the funeral. For the first time since Albert and Catherine had shattered my world, I felt something other than despair. I felt purpose. I felt righteous anger. And most importantly, I felt a growing conviction that I would not be erased from my own life story. They thought they'd won, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. 2 weeks after retaining Sarah, we faced Albert and Catherine for the first time at a mandatory settlement conference. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room at the courthouse with their high-priced attorney James Blackwell present. I barely recognized my son as he strode in, dressed in an expensive suit, his expression cold and dismissive when our eyes met. Catherine walked beside him, her hand possessively on his arm, looking more like his girlfriend than a maternal figure. The thought turned my stomach. "Mrs. Warren," Blackwell began, after introductions, "my clients have generously agreed to extend your move-out date by an additional 30 days and offer a one-time settlement of $50,000. This is considerably more than what the will provides." Sarah smiled thinly. "That's an interesting opening position, counselor. However, my client has been a partner in a 35-year marriage during which substantial assets were accumulated. She is entitled to her fair share of those assets, regardless of Mr. Warren's final wishes." Catherine gave a short, derisive laugh. "Douglas built his company from nothing. Lottie contributed nothing to its success." I couldn't stay silent. "I gave up my nursing career to support Douglas. I raised our son. I hosted clients' organized events that brought in business, maintained our home as a showcase for his success. How is that nothing?" Albert rolled his eyes. "Classic mom, always the martyr. Dad told me how you manipulated him into giving up opportunities because you refused to relocate or adapt." "That's not true," I said, looking directly at my son. "Your father and I made decisions together as partners. Who told you these things, Albert? Was it your father, or was it Catherine?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face before Catherine touched his arm. "Don't engage Albert. She's trying to manipulate you, just like she always has." Sarah intervened smoothly. "Let's focus on the legal issues. My client is contesting the will on several grounds, including questionable capacity at the time of signing due to medication undue influence and the improper disposition of marital assets." "Douglas was perfectly competent," Catherine snapped. "The medical records we've subpoenaed will help determine that," Sarah replied calmly, "as will the testimony from his physician about the cognitive effects of his heart medication." The meeting continued in this vein with proposals and counterproposals that went nowhere. Albert remained largely silent, letting Catherine and her attorney do most of the talking. I kept trying to catch his eye to find some glimpse of the son I had raised, but he avoided direct eye contact. As we were preparing to leave, I gathered my courage and approached Albert directly. "Can we talk privately for a moment, please?" He hesitated, glancing at Catherine, who frowned disapprovingly. 5 minutes? He finally agreed, following me to a quiet corner of the hallway. "Albert, what happened?" I asked, my voice breaking despite my best efforts. "How did we get here? I've always loved you, supported you in everything." His jaw tightened. "Dad told me everything, Mom, about how you trapped him into marriage, how you threatened to ruin him if he ever left, how you tried to turn me against Catherine when I was younger." "None of that is true," I said, stunned. "When did you even meet Catherine? How long has she been in your life without my knowledge?" A flash of something like guilt crossed his face. "Since I was 17. Dad introduced us. She helped me with college applications, career advice. She was there for me in ways you weren't." The timeline struck me like a physical blow. "I was there for you every day of your life, Albert. I helped with your homework, nursed you through illnesses, celebrated every achievement. If Catherine was also in your life during those years, it was because your father and she were keeping secrets and lying to me. She made Dad happy, he said defensively. Happier than you ever did. Did he tell you that, or did she? Before he could answer, Catherine appeared at his feet. Time to go, Albert. The lawyers are waiting. She gave me a cold smile. Don't waste your energy, Lottie. Albert knows who really cares about him. As they walked away, I noticed something that gave me pause. The possessive way Catherine gripped Albert's arm, the way she had interrupted precisely when my questions were beginning to make him think. It reinforced what Sarah had suggested, that Albert was also a victim of manipulation, even if he didn't realize it. The next day brought an unexpected development. I received a call from Tom Harrison, Douglas's longtime colleague and friend. Lottie, I heard about what's happening, he said, his voice grave. I'm so sorry. I should have said something years ago. Said something about what, Tom? I asked, though I suspected the answer. About Catherine. About what's been going on. He sighed heavily. I witnessed their relationship developing. I saw how she isolated Douglas, fed his ego, gradually turned him against you. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. But now I'm fighting for my home and dignity. I finished for him. I want to help, Tom said firmly. I'll testify about what I observed. Catherine's pattern of behavior, how she changed Douglas. It might not change the will, but it could help with the bigger picture. Tom's support was a breakthrough. As an insider at Douglas's company, his testimony about Catherine's manipulation would carry significant weight. Sarah was thrilled when I told her, immediately arranging to take his formal statement. 2 days later, the situation escalated when Albert and Catherine showed up unannounced at the house. They claimed they needed to inventory the property for estate purposes. Despite my discomfort, Sarah had advised me to allow reasonable access to avoid appearing obstructive. I watched in silent fury as they moved through my home. Catherine pointing out items she claimed Douglas had promised her, Albert nodding along as if he had any idea which possessions held meaning for his father. This dining set will look perfect in our new home, Catherine remarked loudly, running her hand along the cherry wood table where our family had shared thousands of meals. When they reached Douglas's office, I followed them in, unwilling to let them have private access to his papers. Catherine went straight to the desk, opening drawers as if she owned them. Looking for something specific? I asked mildly. She startled slightly, then composed herself. Just familiarizing myself with Douglas's filing system. As the new co-owner of his company, I need to understand how he organized things. I noticed her eyes scanning the room, perhaps looking for the old laptop I had already secured elsewhere. Interesting that you need to learn his system now, I commented. I thought you two were partners for 15 years. Her eyes narrowed. We kept our professional and personal lives separate. Did the email suggest otherwise? At this, both Catherine and Albert froze. What emails? Albert asked. I smiled calmly. The ones where your father and Catherine discussed how to cut me out of his will. The ones where Catherine suggested turning you against me. Those emails. Catherine's face flushed with anger. You're making that up. Douglas was careful about his communications. Not careful enough, I replied, thanking Providence for the forgotten old laptop. It's amazing what you can find when you start looking. For the first time, I saw a crack in Catherine's confident facade. She exchanged a look with Albert, who seemed suddenly unsure. We're done here, Catherine announced abruptly. We'll have our attorney contact yours about formally documenting the household inventory. As they left, I caught Albert glancing back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Confusion, doubt, perhaps even the first hints of regret. The confrontation had been difficult, but it had accomplished something important. It had planted seeds of doubt in my son's mind about the woman who had helped destroy our family. That night alone in the house, I felt the first real stirrings of hope. With Tom's support, the medical records we were gathering, and the evidence from the laptop, we were building a case that might not just save my home, but could eventually help me reclaim my relationship with my son. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since the funeral, I believed I might actually win. 3 weeks into our legal battle, Sarah called with breakthrough news. The medical records came through, she said, excitement evident in her voice. Douglas's cardiologist has confirmed he was on a combination of medications that can impair judgment and decision-making, especially in stressful situations. Will that be enough to challenge the will? I asked. It gives us solid ground. And there's more. We found a procedural error in the will's execution. One of the witnesses signed in the wrong place, which technically invalidates the document. I felt a surge of hope. So the will could be thrown out entirely. Potentially, Sarah cautioned, but more likely it gives us leverage for a better settlement. The judge might revert to Douglas's previous will or apply intestate succession laws, which would be more favorable to you as his spouse. Our case was gaining momentum. Tom Harrison had provided a detailed affidavit about Catherine's calculated pursuit of Douglas, describing how she had systematically isolated him from colleagues and friends who might question their relationship. He recounted instances where Catherine had disparaged me to Douglas, planting seeds of dissatisfaction about our marriage. She would say things like, "Lottie really held you back from expanding internationally," or, "It's a shame Lottie never supported your bigger ambitions," Tom had testified. I watched Douglas start to believe this revised history of his marriage. Then came another unexpected development. While organizing Douglas's financial records for court, I discovered a safety deposit box key I hadn't known about. Sarah helped me gain legal access to the box, where we found something startling: documents for a separate bank account in my name that Douglas had established secretly, containing nearly $300,000. Attached was a sealed envelope addressed to me. Inside was a letter in Douglas's handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before his death. "Lottie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and things have probably gotten complicated. This account is for you alone. Catherine doesn't know about it. I set it up because despite everything, I couldn't leave you with nothing after 35 years. I know an apology isn't enough, but I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. The situation with Catherine evolved in ways I never intended. What started as an affair became something else, and before I knew it, I was living a double life. I couldn't figure out how to escape. I'm not proud of how I've treated you or the things I've allowed Catherine to say about you to Albert. The truth is, you were always a good wife and mother. The failure was mine, Douglas." The letter wasn't a full confession or apology, but it contradicted the narrative Catherine had constructed about our marriage. It showed Douglas had still felt responsibility toward me, perhaps even guilt. Most importantly, it revealed his awareness that Catherine and he had manipulated Albert with falsehoods. Sarah was ecstatic. "This is gold, Lottie. It proves Douglas had second thoughts, that he didn't fully support the campaign against you. And the secret account shows he wanted to provide for you despite what the will says." When we presented these findings at our next court appearance, the judge ordered all parties to attend mediation before proceeding to trial. It was a positive sign. The judge had seen enough merit in our case to believe a resolution was possible. The day before mediation, I received an unexpected visitor. Albert stood on my doorstep alone, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I nodded, stepping aside, my heart pounding. We sat in the living room, the tension between us palpable. "I found something," he said after a long silence. He pulled out his phone and showed me text messages between Catherine and someone named Michael. The messages clearly indicated a romantic relationship with references to their future together once the Warren situation was resolved. "She's been lying to me," Albert said, his voice cracking slightly. "I went through her phone when she was in the shower. These messages go back months, even before Dad died." I wanted to feel vindicated, but seeing my son's pain only brought sadness. "I'm sorry, Albert. You've been caught in the middle of something terrible. One of Dad's old colleagues contacted me," he continued. He told me how Catherine had pursued Dad, how she'd done the same thing with her previous bosses. Then I found these messages and he shook his head. I don't know what's true anymore. Your father wasn't perfect, I said gently. He made serious mistakes, but Catherine deliberately manipulated both of you. She saw an opportunity with a successful man and took it regardless of who got hurt. Albert looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since the funeral. Did you really threaten to ruin Dad if he ever left you? Never, I said firmly. Your father and I had problems in recent years, but I never threatened him or tried to trap him. We built our life together willingly, Albert. We loved each other for most of our marriage. I remember, he admitted softly, before things changed. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Albert agreed to speak with Sarah about what he'd discovered regarding Catherine's deception. His testimony would significantly strengthen our position in mediation. The next day, we all gathered with our respective attorneys and a court-appointed mediator. The atmosphere was tense, especially when Catherine realized Albert had arrived separately and chosen to sit on my side of the table. What's going on? She demanded, looking between us. Albert met her gaze steadily. I know about Michael, Catherine. I know you've been playing all of us. Her face paled, then flushed with anger. That's ridiculous. Michael is just a friend. A friend you're planning a future with, Albert challenged. A friend you text at midnight saying you miss his body. The mediator cleared her throat. Perhaps we should focus on the legal matters at hand. Sarah seized the opportunity, presenting our accumulated evidence, the medical records showing Douglas's impaired capacity, the technical error in the will, Tom Harrison's testimony about Catherine's manipulation, the secret account Douglas had established for me, and his letter acknowledging Catherine's lies about me to Albert. Additionally, Sarah added, we now have evidence that Ms. Mills has been engaged in a romantic relationship with another man while claiming to be committed to Mr. Warren's memory and his son's welfare. Catherine's attorney tried to dismiss these findings, but his arguments lacked conviction. With each piece of evidence, Catherine's case weakened visibly. When Sarah presented financial records showing how Douglas had diverted marital assets to support Catherine for years, the mediator's expression made clear which way the wind was blowing. By the end of the day, Catherine's attorney was proposing a settlement. I would keep the house and receive 50% of Douglas's company's shares. Albert would receive the remaining shares and some investment properties. Catherine would retain only personal gifts Douglas had given her and a modest cash settlement. This is outrageous, Catherine fumed. Douglas wanted me to have part of the company. We built it together. Did you? The mediator asked mildly. The corporate records don't show you as having any official role in the company for the past decade. The settlement wasn't everything we might have won at trial, but it was fair, and it spared all of us the emotional toll of a protracted court battle. Most importantly, it kept our family home in my possession and ensured I would have financial security. After the mediation concluded, Albert approached me in the courthouse hallway. Can we talk sometime, really talk? I'd like that, I said, fighting back tears of relief. Catherine stormed past us, pausing only to hiss, "This isn't over," before continuing toward the exit. But it was over, at least the legal battle. The emotional healing would take much longer, but for the first time I believed it was possible. They had thought they would win easily, that I would surrender without a fight. They had no idea how strong I could be when everything I valued was at stake. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I stood straighter, breathed deeper. I had fought for my dignity and won. The road ahead would still have challenges, but I would face them on my own terms, not as a victim, but as a survivor. 1 year has passed since that day in court when I reclaimed my life. So much has changed, and yet in some ways I've simply returned to the person I always was, strong, determined, and guided by love rather than bitterness. The first weeks after the settlement were difficult. Living in the house filled with memories of Douglas brought both comfort and pain. Every room held echoes of our life together. the good years and the deceptions. Eventually, I made a decision that surprised even me. I would sell the house and start fresh. It wasn't running away. It was choosing what served my healing rather than clinging to a past that couldn't be changed. The sale brought a substantial sum that, combined with my share of Douglas's company, gave me complete financial independence. I bought a smaller place closer to downtown, a bright condo with a view of the city park. It's entirely mine, decorated to my taste without compromising or considering anyone else's preferences. At 59 years old, I finally have a space that reflects just me, and there's unexpected joy in that. But the most meaningful change came from an idea born in my darkest moments. During those weeks of fighting for my rights, I connected with other women in similar situations. Women who had been discarded after decades of marriage, who had sacrificed careers for family, only to find themselves vulnerable when relationships ended. With Sarah's encouragement, I established the New Chapter Foundation, a support and advocacy organization for women facing late-life divorce or widowhood, complicated by financial deception. We provide legal referrals, emotional support groups, and workshops on financial literacy and career reentry. The work is deeply fulfilling, transforming my personal tragedy into purpose. My relationship with Albert remains a work in progress. After the mediation, we began meeting regularly for coffee, gradually rebuilding trust through honest conversations about what had happened. He shared how Catherine had methodically shaped his perception of me from his teenage years, offering special attention and insights about his parents' marriage that a young man couldn't recognize as manipulation. She would take me to lunch when Dad was busy, he explained during one of our talks. She'd ask questions about home, about you, then twist whatever I said. If I mentioned you reminded me about homework, she'd say, "Your mom seems so controlling, doesn't she? Your dad and I believe young men need freedom to find their path." Year after year, these subtle influences accumulated until Albert saw me through Catherine's carefully constructed lens. The revelation of her betrayal with Michael had shattered that perspective, forcing him to reevaluate everything she had told him. 6 months after the settlement, Albert joined the board of my foundation, using his financial expertise to help women navigate complex divorce settlements. Working together has healed much of the damage between us, though some scars will always remain. As for Catherine, she made good on her threat that this isn't over. She attempted to challenge the settlement, but the judge dismissed her case. When that failed, she tried approaching Albert again, sending messages claiming she had made a mistake, but still cared for him. The final confrontation came when Catherine showed up uninvited at my new place during a foundation board meeting. I answered the door to find her standing there, less polished than I remembered, her confidence diminished. "I want to talk to Albert," she demanded. "He doesn't want to talk to you," I replied calmly. "You've turned him against me just like you tried to turn Douglas against me," she accused. I studied her face, seeing beyond the anger to the desperation beneath. "No one turned anyone against you, Catherine. Your own actions did that." "You think you've won," she said bitterly. "You have the money, the foundation, Albert back on your side. But Douglas loved me, not you. Remember that." I could have argued, could have shown her Douglas's letter that suggested otherwise, but instead I simply said, "I hope you find what you're looking for, Catherine. Real love doesn't require destroying other people to survive." She left, and we haven't seen her since. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she moved to another state, perhaps to start her pattern again with a new target. I can only hope that whoever he is, he recognizes the warning signs I missed. The greatest lesson from this painful journey has been about self-worth. For too many years, I defined myself through my roles as wife and mother, measuring my value by how well I served others. When those relationships were threatened, it felt like losing my entire identity. Now I understand that while those connections are precious, they aren't the foundation of who I am. My worth exists independently of how others see me or what roles I play in their lives. This wisdom didn't come easily, but it's the gift I try to share with every woman who comes to the foundation. The truth is, betrayal almost destroyed me, but in fighting back, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. Sometimes the deepest wounds become the doorways to our most authentic selves. As for forgiveness, that's complicated. I've forgiven Albert, understanding how he was manipulated during formative years. I'm working on forgiving Douglas, recognizing that people are complex and flawed, capable of both love and terrible mistakes. Forgiving Catherine is harder, but my anger toward her no longer consumes me. That's progress enough for now. Today, I'm not defined by what happened to me, but by what I chose to do next. My life is rich with purpose, friendships, and even new romance, a story for another time. At nearly 60 years old, I'm more confident and fulfilled than ever before. If you're facing your own version of betrayal or loss, remember this. They may take what you thought was yours. They may even temporarily take people you love, but they cannot take your inherent worth or your power to rebuild. When they think they've won, that's precisely when you might discover who you truly are. I'd love to hear your stories of resilience and renewal in the comments below. Have you ever had to start over when you least expected it? How did you find your strength? Please like this video. If my story resonated with you, subscribe to follow more journeys of transformation and share with someone who might need to hear that, even after the darkest betrayal, a meaningful life awaits on the other side. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late for a new chapter.